An agenda that seems to have grown a bit.
It's just
So everybody ready? We should get ready and get underway.
Let's go, Mike.
Okie dokie. So I just one quick question, Steph. You mentioned whether or not to discuss the guidelines.
I just yep.
So was that a question, or are you saying that?
Well, let's talk to Jennifer. Can you turn your mic on, please, Jen?
Yes.
So do we haven't received any material regarding the guidelines.
Yeah, I know it's a bit unorthodox. What's happening is because I'm going on leave at the end of the month, I wanted to get this material to you all as soon as possible. So I've basically been working on it up to the minute of this meeting.
Understood.
My thinking was that I could provide it to you and I could explain it to you, and then discussion and comments could perhaps occur after the meeting rather than asking you to respond immediately upon seeing them.
Gotcha.
And they're still in a draft form, but they're much further along than the last time you saw them.
Perfect.
That's what I was kind of
Okay.
propose, but I don't know, Steph, is that an acceptable approach?
That sounds fine to me if the
Right.
panel's okay with that.
Sure.
I'm fine with it.
Sure. So well, at the end, we'll have some discussion about that.
Mhm. So I would welcome any questions or anything, but I'm just not expecting full feedback.
Gotcha. Okay, good.
Do that over the following week.
Let's get started with the stuff on the agenda then. Welcome everyone to Design Panel Meeting, 1 o'clock, Wednesday, the 12th of May, 2021. Steph, thanks for putting this all together. Jennifer, thanks for your last minute stuff. I know you're off on leave soon. So first order of business, let's look at an approval of the agenda. In favor, first thing. Thanks, Vince.
So the late items are the guidelines and supporting material for the health center.
Gotcha. Perfect. And okay, so sorry, did I see a second there or? Great, thanks, Jeremy. All in favor?
Sorry to chime in so late. Just wanted to make sure that the second DP application, is that part of the agenda?
Application for Foxglove?
Yes.
I believe that's on the agenda.
Oh,
Correct,
sorry,
Steph?
I called it supporting materials. Sorry, Emma.
Okay.
It's, yeah,
Okay,
they
excellent.
received it. Sorry about that.
Excellent, thank you. Good question, Emma. Second order of business, adoption of the minutes. Any dialogue needed here? Great, thanks, Vince.
Second.
All in favor? Wonderful. Public commentary.
I don't have anyone from the public other than your esteemed guests who may want to contribute when Emma's speaking.
Yeah, so we'll, I guess anyone presenting will do so at their phase of the discussion. Number 4, development permit application that we've seen once, and it's 4.1 back to us via Emma and Salal. Emma, are you speaking to that?
Yeah, I'm just going to cover the revisions really quickly, and I think the applicant also has some presentation or would like to discuss
Excellent.
as well.
Welcome, Dan Parke.
Thank you, Mike.
Nice to put a face to the name that I see around the island.
So should I just jump into the presentation?
Yeah, let's do that. Thanks, Emma.
Okay, I'm going to share screen.
Welcome, Rondi.
How are you?
Great. Good to see you.
Sorry to be late.
Okay, So good afternoon, Advisory Design Panel members. As Mike mentioned, this application has been to the ADP once already, and it's come back, hopefully to address the concerns that came up last time. This is, for completeness, DP 2021-0018 for 1037 Miller Road, better known as the Health Center. I think most of you are familiar with this site. It is within the Village Revitalization Development Permit area, part of Snug Cove, just off of Miller Road, south of the new fire hall site. This is the site plan shown in the middle. That site is roughly highlighted in the orange area in the screenshot of Google Street View. And shown here is the original design and architectural rendering. And the orange highlighted area is the footprint of the building, which has remained largely unchanged. Most of the revisions are actually on the exterior finishing. Here is the rendering of the revised design. So as you can see, although the footprint hasn't really changed, the exterior looks quite different, and this is to address those concerns that came up previously. Specifically, just to jog everyone's memory, the original design, there were some fiber cement panels that were incorporated into the design, and there was some confusion as to the use of those panels. They look like windows, but not. There are also concerns around the dormers being too modern and boxy. The general window configuration and architectural features had too much horizontality, and the use of metal siding versus wood. There was a preference for wood or wood-like appearance siding, and also incorporation of more color and better pedestrian connections. So the revised design is to address those concerns. As you can see, the color scheme has changed quite a bit. The original color scheme is shown here. Mostly it was a lighter and a dark brown wood finish. The new design is predominantly a slate blue with a lighter wood color. These are elevations from the original design and the elevations from the revised design. So in addition to the change in color, you can also see that I think one of the main changes is replacing that flat green roof in the front with a sloped roof along with gabled dormers. And the change in window configuration is pretty significant. And the metal siding has been replaced with a hardy product with a wood-like finish. And I think those are the main things. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to actually look at this in more detail in the package with the full-size drawings. But the last thing that was addressed was the pedestrian connections, concerns around not having a more direct pedestrian path for those coming from the south on Miller. There was discussion with the applicant. The topography of the site would make that very difficult while also fitting in all of the required parking. But after this discussion, I think a good compromise was reached. The redesign will have a pedestrian crosswalk here where the disabled parking spots are. And this will also help with connecting people coming off of the Crippen trails to the east. And then the existing pedestrian walkway will be widened to help allow for more direct access coming off of the sidewalk area. And just to refresh on, the guidelines for the village revitalization area, Mainly, we're looking at clustering the parking so that doesn't cover the whole site, and that the parking be more discreet, screened from public view. We don't want buildings that are too tall, use of natural tones, maintaining that arts and crafts aesthetic, massing so that the building looks like a collection of smaller masses rather than one large one, and a preference for more, I'd say, rustic signage and details, native vegetation in the landscaping, and prioritizing that pedestrian network. I've also included active design guidelines. We covered this in more detail last time, but that's speaking to facilitating things like walking and cycling. So this development does have bike racks, and it does have paths connecting to the existing pedestrian network. I'm going to skip over all of this. And we're looking for a recommendation of support from the ADP, and that wraps up what I have to say.
And my comment is, I think that in reference to the parking, you should try to tie it in so that there could be overflow parking in the fire department with building, which is right next door to it.
Hey, Mike, I have a question for Mr. Chair. Do you want me to give a presentation before we jump into comments? I do have one, and Amer, the landscape architect, does as well. Or do you want to jump right into comments? I'm okay either way.
I think, you know what, Dan, it would be great to hear from you. And if you guys could sort of coincide together, I think it would be beneficial to all of us to hear that. Yeah, so hold that thought, Rondi. And thank you, Dan.
Okay.
Rondi, by the way, I really like the idea of having overflow parking on the fire hall site. So let's get to that when we get to that site plan. Can I share the screen? Is it good to go? I should be able to. Okay. Just give me 1 minute. See the rendering now?
Yep.
Great.
Okay, great. Well, first off, thanks everybody for coming, especially the volunteers. I've been on design panels before. I know it takes quite a lot of time and energy, so I really appreciate your efforts coming out yet again for another meeting. There's not a lot of big buildings on Bowen, but every building we do is fairly important here because everybody sees it and everybody's, like, especially this building, like probably everybody in the community will use the building. So it's pretty important. So your input is really valuable, and thanks for your comments. Emma went over the comments from the last meeting, and I've had a few discussions with her. So we basically responded to that. We've redesigned the building, and I'll just quickly walk you through this and just maybe go over a few things that Emma touched on in a little bit more detail. And then Amer is the landscape architect. He's with ETA, and he'll give you a little bit more information on all things landscape. That was all the comments. You guys came up with the comments. I don't think there's any point in reiterating these, so we'll just move along. Obviously, you know where the site is. I'll just go over some of the site stuff really quickly because it does impact some of the later discussion. So as you know, the fire hall site is to the north, Birch is to the east, Miller Road's on the left-hand side to the west, and we've got access to the parking on the south. So this is the topography of the site. So Miller Road is on the top here, and this is access to the parking lot. And it slopes quite a lot. It's a bit deceptive. If you're looking at it on paper, you wouldn't realize that it slopes so much. So from the high point to the low point is around 20 feet. So we've got this rocky outcropping here, which we're trying not to mess with too much. We don't want to blast and excavate that. We've really tried to work the building around that. And that has some impact on pedestrian access and how to get into the building with level access. So keep this in mind as we're going through the later drawings. So pedestrian access, the main pedestrian access, we really wanted to have a public face. The main pedestrian access facing Miller Road, like that's basically the street address. We didn't want to be coming in off a parking lot. I mean, yes, people will be coming off parking to the south, but that's the main pedestrian access. And there is that gravel walkway all the way along Miller right now, and there will be a drop off there. There's a right of way or an allowance through the municipal land for access through to Crippen. Like, we don't know exactly how that's going to shape up, but the municipality has allowed for that. So somebody could come from the park, walk through here somehow and connect up with this building. The car access, the main public access, is from the south, and that's through an easement on municipal land, and our public parking is here. The site slopes off quite a bit down here, so this is actually a totally different level, and that's employee parking only. So the employee parking only comes through an easement on the fire hall site, and those are two totally separate things. We do not want the public going into employee parking and vice versa. So as you know, there's 2 floors of the building. Main floor is all clinical, lower floor is all tenant space. So there'll be dentists, probably physios, we don't know who else is down there, and service spaces. So that's a massing model. This is a very rough model, but to give you an idea of how it shapes up, and we'll get into the drawings in a minute. But that's that rocky outcropping I was just talking about. This is the main pedestrian access of Miller, and that's level access. So you come straight from Miller, you'd be able to come in a wheelchair or a bicycle or a unicycle, whatever you like. You'd be able to get easily into the entrance of the building. It's also level access out this side. So that's actually the ambulance parking spot. And it is level from this point over here. It is level to get around into the main entrance of the building. So that was our intention. We're trying to make it as accessible as possible, assuming we're gonna have people in strollers and wheelchairs and walkers going in and out of this building. Just one thing to mention on that ambulance access, just so you know, this is not intended to be like a hospital or an emergency where we've got ambulances coming and going all the time. It will be quite a rare occurrence. And the ambulance basically will be picking people up from time to time rather than dropping them off. If somebody is in an ambulance and they've been seriously injured or they're sick, they would be going straight to the hospital. They probably would not be coming to this facility. But if a patient showed up at the facility and for let's say they threw their back really badly and they're having mobility problems and they couldn't leave, an ambulance could pick them up from this ambulance bay and take them to the mainland. So I just wanted to be clear about that, because that's not like an ambulance coming and going. That's a very occasional occurrence. This is from the other side of the building. That main access is here. This is sort of a secondary access to get into a flex room on the main floor. So this is part of the discussion I had with Emma in response to your question about pedestrian access. So on the south side, this is the easement to access Crippen Park. And Emma, in discussions we were talking about, like if somebody wanted to get from here into the building, how would they do it? So they could cross over here. This ambulance bay sits empty 99% of the time. So that's a big, obvious place, easy for pedestrians to access the main entrance. And that's the main level access for pedestrians off Miller. So we tried to make this a little more generous and a bit more inviting to come into the main entrance. And I think between these 2 pedestrian points, I think it's an improvement. Hopefully you'll agree. Also this, I just wanted to emphasize as well, this whole corner, there's some concern, Emma mentioned there's some concern about people potentially taking shortcuts through here from Miller. And there is signage on this corner and a lot of landscaping actually. Plus the grade steps down quite a bit. Like that's from the high point to the entrance is probably at least 6 or 7, maybe 8 feet. So this is not going to be a logical shortcut. Like I'm pretty sure nobody's going to try to walk through there. That it's more likely they would go down to a level place to get in or walk down here and go in. It's just a larger scale version of what we just looked at. So that basically that high point is right here. And that's actually quite a lot of landscaping there. Amer will go through that. That's the lower floor. There's no particular comments on that. So I'll just skip ahead. Again, that's the main floor with those pedestrian access points. I don't know how much or how little detail you want to get into, but basically this whole floor is the clinical floor. We wanted it all on one floor, so you didn't have to go between floors. It does have an elevator, so somebody could come in here and go downstairs. Like the public could go downstairs, say to a dental meeting. So they could park here and go downstairs. They wouldn't have to come around to this side of the building. There's quite a big waiting room that faces out onto Miller. Again, this is really I would call the more public side of the building. This is the more private side of the building with exam rooms and the clinical spaces. That's the new roof plan. This will make more sense when we look at the drawings, but these dormers, the original dormers did actually serve a function. So they had operable windows, and the idea is to allow for stacked ventilation so that we don't have to air condition the building. So we're really being very cognizant of costs right now. Costs are really high in construction, and air conditioning the building would be a massive cost, like to the tune of $150,000. So we're trying to use passive ventilation and use those dormers to allow for stacked ventilation in the summer. So these are the revised dormers. These are now gable dormers. So the dormers do serve a function. You know, they will actually operable windows on the lower floor and allow stacked ventilation. You can vent out hot air in the summer. So that was the previous version of the plan. That's the newer version. So just going back to that, we had this big green roof on the Miller Road side, these dormers, which were, I would say, fairly contemporary. We've modified all that. This is now a shed roof rather than that green roof. The dormers are gable dormers, much more traditional in appearance. And obviously we made quite a big difference, changes in the color and the materials. So the materials, rather than metal panel, it was wood grain metal panel, which personally I kind of like, but you know, I realize it's not exactly an arts and crafts aesthetic perhaps. So it's a fiber cement product. You've probably all seen it. It's hardy. It actually looks like wood siding. You know, from a distance, you probably wouldn't even know if it's wood or hardy. So basically the whole building is wood. It's either horizontal wood siding or vertical, it's either horizontal or vertical hardy. And there's timber accents wherever we can. Part of the rationale for the siding, the metal siding originally, and now this hardy, was to use non-combustible materials. So we're definitely concerned with wildfire. And we've had a lot of discussion with the board and with the fire hall, actually the firemen. And we thought if there's two buildings we want to have standing on Bowen during a fire event, it would be this building and the fire hall. So that's the rationale for the fiber cement siding. We do have timber elements. The timbers are big enough to be considered non-combustible. Like these will not, you could hold a match or a blowtorch to them. They won't burst into flames. Like they're big enough, they'll char, but they won't actually burn. That's the original version. That's that green roof facing Miller. That's the waiting room there. That's now the newer version. So we've got this gable dormer, more traditional windows. The colors are pretty obvious. I won't detail that, but this was some of the original ideas we were bouncing around when we were looking at colors. And you know, probably the color of that building is the closest. It's, you know, a fairly rich bluish color with, you know, some punches of accent color. So that's kind of what we're aiming for. That was the original south elevation. That's that ambulance bay I was telling about. The entrance to the building is here. That's the newer version. So the idea was to break up that big gable. So it's now got a smaller gable over this area, which is the treatment room. And the windows are now vertical in orientation. And we've got some trellis and woodwork over top of that. So it actually does shade these windows. That's being the south elevation. We do want some shade there. You can see the dormers in the background there. Those are the gable dormers. This is the elevation facing Birch. That was the original elevation. That's the new elevation. So we've now got these two gable dormers up top, mostly horizontal hardy, and some vertical as accents sort of between windows. And the window configuration is quite a bit different than the original version, much more vertical. There was some talk, some discussion I gathered with the amount of windows on this elevation, wondering why we couldn't have more windows. So part of it is a privacy issue. So next door is Birch, and we have, it's residential, multi-unit residential, and it's, I can't remember if it's 3 or 4 stories, but there's definitely gonna be a lot of windows looking onto this. And we have exam rooms and treatment rooms and dental and physio. So we definitely did not want to have huge expanses of windows. So we tried to strike a reasonable balance. That was the original north elevation. That's facing the fire hall. That's the modified north elevation. Speaks for itself, I believe. We do have limitations on the amount of glazing we can have on this wall because it's relatively close to the property line. So that right now is pretty much maxed out. We could maybe get another square foot or 2, but that's pretty much it. And again, so that's the final product. And I'll turn it over to Amer and he can discuss the landscape, and then we'll go back to questions.
Thank you, Dan, very
Okay.
much. Amer, whenever you're ready.
Sure. Okay. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to be talking about the landscape. The design approach for the landscape was basically taken to be a community-oriented design, where openness on all boundaries is there. So you wouldn't be seeing like any kind of fencing or like anything that would block the entrances for pedestrians. The main entrance for the circulation for pedestrian is from Miller Road at this location. And as Dan discussed, this is the rock outcropping, where it would be mainly native plants and some herbs, with the location of the planting here as well, and the trees would block any access from this location to here to the main entry. The circulation of the vehicular would be here for the users, and the vehicular for the staff would go up from this location. We're giving access to pedestrians from the upper floor to the lower floor with this walkway in here, going up to from this location to the upper level, and here with stairs to the lower level. This area for where we have the ambulance, as Dan has mentioned, that there would be a shaded, an access for pedestrian, not shaded, just an access for the pedestrian that would be coming from the park next on the side. We do provide benches and bike racks here for any person that would want to use the space around the entrance, the main entrance. And there at the lower end space, there would be the garbage disposal. That it would be shaded and screened as well for, for the visuals of that as well. We do have the PMT and the generator at this location. Also, they would be screened, keeping in mind the ventilation for that is a necessity. Lighting at the location would be taken care of at later stages, but we would be dealing with the concept of dark skies, where the minimum glare would be taken into consideration. And there would be lit walkways main walkways for the pedestrians. The permeability on this side, the building takes up to about 45% to 50% of the plot. The remainder of that is 80% permeable. That's given around the locations of the parking lots, and of course the planting and the planted areas are all permeable. The selection of material for the hardscape and the benches would be of low maintenance and sustainable. And the plant material that are selected as well for this project are native and drought tolerant plants. And we are also taking into consideration deer resistant plant material as well. We do introduce some non-native, but native adaptive, non-invasive species for this area, and which in our experience works well in Bowen Island. For me, this is that's the end of the presentation for landscape.
Thank you, Amer.
Sure.
Very much. Comments, design panel. Rondi, I guess we'll start with you for that parking question.
Can we go back to the plan?
Sure, I'll share my screen.
The parking plan and basic plan.
You want to talk about the plan? What do you want to say?
My comment on it is looking at the garbage area in the upper right-hand corner, I don't think that'll be near enough to handle a building like that. You'll need almost 2 parking spaces. You know, just as an example, our little marina here where there's only 15 people living in it, it takes two big dumpsters plus an extra space. And I'm sure the medical facilities will have all kinds of special garbage disposals. My other comment is, what is the peak line running down the driveway? Is that just one in, one out type of thing?
That's the property line. There's a shared driveway for accessing our site and Birch.
Okay, very good. My comment is that I think you need some access to the lot. I guess it would be above you or below you, the fire department as well.
Sorry, Rondi, can I just ask a clarification question? What do you mean access to it, for public or?
If you can't, I see that you can't get much parking access to them or vice versa, or it'd be nice somehow, because they're both indirectly municipal buildings, that they could share some parking.
Can I comment on that, Mike? Can I weigh in?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so we actually have had quite a bit of discussion over the last year or two with the municipality and with the fire department. And the fire department really, really, really does not want a lot of public access on the fire hall site because they've got, in an emergency, they've got a lot of the firefighters all arrive individually in cars and they don't want public kind of getting in the way of that. They have to get into the trucks and get out quickly. So they're willing to live with employee parking only for access through the fire hall site and access for Birch, but that's it. They do not want parking. They don't want us parking on their site.
Okay, a couple other minor questions. You have the main access off Miller Road. Well, remember, most people will arrive by auto, not walking from Miller Road. And the other one is, you have the dormers. Are those openable from the main floor?
Yes, the dormers would have operable windows. That's the idea.
Yes, but how do they operate? Can they operate from the main floor?
Yes, it would be a remote operation. So yes, but the idea is you could stand on the main floor and operate those windows. That's right.
Good. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for the comments.
And just a clarification question. The access coming on the north side, it's not really shown in this, is it?
On the landscape plan, it's not
vehicle access, yeah. How does that access relate to the fire hall? Just out of curiosity.
Oh, that's a topic we could talk about for quite a long time. So the fire hall plans keep changing. You probably know a bit about the history of it, Mike. So it came in way over budget. They had to dramatically revise it. Originally, the revision, they said that they would leave that the south side of the fire hall site. We could do whatever we want. We've got this allowance. We can adjust the grades, do anything we like. The fire hall was going to be pushed north. Now they've changed that just as of last week. So it's a little different again. So we have a 24-foot easement for access. It'll be one way to get out. So to get into the fire hall site, I think the firemen would go in on the north side of the site, and then there's parking in behind. And we would use the south access for access to our lot and to Birch. But to be quite honest, it's still a little bit up in the air. It hasn't been sorted out.
That's a little frustrating.
Yes, it is.
Well, thank you both for presenting this. And Rondi, thanks for your questions. Other comments? Jeremy.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I thought it was a fairly reasonable response to our concerns. It certainly looks a lot more Bowen and a lot less Burnaby to me. It's meaner, so yeah, well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to ditto that essentially. It's unfortunate in a way that the green roof is no longer there, but my suspicion is that also saved a bunch of money. Probably wasn't just a design effort there. It was probably some budgeting going on.
There's some serious budgeting going on. So
Yeah.
We're all struggling with this right now. It's really, really a big issue. You know,
In
whatever
term-
we priced out 6 months ago is no longer relevant. Like the prices
oh.
have gone up so much.
Absolutely.
Oh, we
Last
could have a
week-
separate conversation about that, boy.
Yeah.
In my opinion, simply put, I think that in terms of, and my question I always grapple with is, does it meet the intent of the guidelines? And you know, there might be a couple of minor things you might debate, but I think essentially, yes, absolutely.
I concur. I think it fits well to the site. The changes work for us, and I support it wholeheartedly.
Yeah, I completely agree as well. Thanks for taking into consideration the last comments, especially with the massing and materials and the form of the roof. I think it nicely fits in with the Snug Cove guidelines.
Mm-hmm. Betty? You're muted still, I see, so maybe you don't want to speak.
We can't hear you.
Yeah,
We
there we
are
go.
muted, yeah, so I
Yeah.
don't see background noise. No, I think you responded well to the feedback from the committee. I actually liked the previous one, but I understand we're on Snug Cove guidelines, and I think you've done a good job, so onward.
Betty,
Right.
thanks for piping up on that. We do come across really, really great designs at times that unfortunately need to be adjusted because of the reason we're here.
And just for the record, we're mourning the loss of the green roof ourselves. We thought that was a really nice feature of the building.
That was a great thing.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, thank you again. I think we want to make a motion perhaps on the wording.
Yeah, just
Steph.
a simple support would be good. I've got here, the advisory design panel support proposed development permit application DP blah, blah, blah for constructing health center.
I like the blah, blah. I support that.
There'd be a lot of numbers.
Yep. All in favor?
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Great. Unanimous.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. Really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan.
you.
Thanks, Amer.
We're looking forward to getting this thing built.
No kidding. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
So we'll
You can
sign
hang out if you want, or get on to other things.
I would love to, but I have a few other things to do, but thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Okay, take care.
Thank
Have
you,
a good
Dan.
day. Bye.
Thank you, Amer.
Bye.
So the next item, number 5, I understand we're going to bump that to the end. The guidelines.
Yeah, let's do Emma's, and, oh, she's gone.
Yep.
Emma,
I'm still here. I'm still here.
Great.
do you want to present now?
For Foxglove?
Yep, I can do
Great,
that.
great.
Let me just
Thanks, Emma.
2 Foxglove.
locate that presentation. Here it is. Too many permits on the go. All right. Just gonna screen share right now. There we go. And this is a new application. It just came in, and normally staff would spend a bit more time with the review and internal referrals among the departments before it comes to the ADP. But I think in the interest of everyone's time, since we have a meeting scheduled, I thought it would be nice to also present it at this meeting. This is DP number 2021-0156, located at 1112 Foxglove Lane. Is part of the subdivision known as, I think it's Village by the Sea, Village by the, actually, I'm not sure which name they've landed on now, but it's beside Snug Cove House. And this is the architectural rendering of the building. They are proposing to put a duplex on this lot. So those lots in that subdivision have been subdivided for duplex buildings on the north side lots, and then on the south side they are meant to be single family. The color scheme as shown here, I have been told by the applicant that in real life the colors do come across quite a bit lighter. So they do have samples of the products and colors available if any of the ADP members feel strongly about seeing that in person. I can arrange to have those available at Municipal Hall at a future date. Just let me know. But in general, it is a predominantly light gray building with off-white trim and black roof and black windows and doors. The lots are very narrow, so you will see that the buildings are all correspondingly narrow. It is at full would be 3 stories going along the slope of the lot, which is quite significant, the slope. This is the side that fronts onto Foxglove Lane, and as you can see, the very lowest level is actually a carport for 2 parking spaces. This is the north elevation stairs going to both units, 1 unit in the front and 1 unit in the back. This is elevation from the rear of the lot, showing the unit to the back. And then this elevation is what you would see, I guess, closer to the cove, to the village side. Whoops. There is a little bit of landscaping on the rear of the lot. There will be 2 planters in a stone face veneer, some small trees in the upper planter, and in both there will be some native shrubs and grass. So unlike the previous application, this is actually the village periphery development permit area with slightly different guidelines. So I've just summarized them here. I think, again, we are concerned about native vegetation in the landscaping, maintaining our views of nature mainly, giving the impression of smaller scale buildings, that the parking be screened or not noticeable from public view, and to reflect the nearby character of the village, so that arts and crafts theme again. But other than that, it's fairly general, and I think it's a bit more lenient than the village revitalization guidelines. So for this application, staff is looking for support from the ADP and general comments from discussion.
Good.
Thanks, Emma, very much. Like all those properties, hard to fit much in the way of greening, is there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
Sue Ellen.
Oh, good.
Thank you. I'll just chime in briefly. I don't have a lot of expertise, but in plants, I do, native plants, and just for the consideration of the committee, dwarf rhododendrons and pyrus and Japanese forest grass and liriope. These are not native plants that we would find growing naturally on Bowen. Neither is autumn fern, and I'm having trouble reading some of the other ones, but I think that might have got it. The amelanchier is the top one in the upper planter, but I'm not sure how those qualify as native. They're all from other places, not native West Coast rainforest. Not
Emma, could you remind me, there's actually 2 levels of landscape review. There's in theory what we're doing, but then there's also the village guidelines themselves. Is that right? The village in the
Yeah, this subdivision is subject to design approval from the strata or the
Yeah.
developer. So they have received approval, and I didn't know that the plants that they have are not actually native. So I can definitely bring that up and put it as a condition of the permit.
I just want to leave it with the committee. I'm offering this little bit of input. I know people plant these kinds of things and there aren't that many native plants. And I know that there's lots of confusion out there about what is a native plant. And so I'll just leave it up with the committee. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that certainly from my experience, often people pick and choose without that knowledge. It might be an aesthetic thing. It might be, oh, this is good in the winter. This is good in the summer. This flowers at such and such a time. Not aware there's a comparable plant that grows here, that always has, that could suit that desire. So certainly that should be conveyed to them somehow so that they're able to act where possible in that direction.
So just for clarity, does the committee want like an explicit condition attached to the permit?
I looked at the our design guidelines aren't that clear about what is a native plant either.
We've had that discussion, yeah.
It's a whole area that needs to be clarified. And I
Do you think
apologize.
Jennifer might be including that in her discussion of the guidelines afterwards? Maybe
for this application, it feels like, if I recall, we debated some wording about native-like.
Yeah, we did.
Native-like, or something to that extent. And I think that is the terminology currently that we're dealing with. But it would be nice to put forward a comment that suggests that they dig deeper into what they're going to plant and try and choose accordingly. I don't see us making it a requirement to support this, but I think we should have some wording in there. Betty?
I just say from the previous presentation that the notion also of plants that aren't going to become self-seeders and invasive. So definitely non-invasive, because you're always balancing that, what will the deer leave alone? And you stray into some pretty interesting things. And a lot of the things we find in our forest are there not because they're native, but because the deer didn't eat them.
True.
Good point.
You know, a good resource right now is the Bone phone book just came out, and there's a good little section in there about native plants and stuff like that. It's really good this time.
Great, Vince. Thank you.
I, for one, support the drawings, as presented. We all know they're skinny lots, what they can do. That's not too dissimilar to the last two that were put in on that same side of the street. The plantings they'll have to deal with. We all know that if they put the wrong ones in, they're not going to last. But we talked about it in the past about how no one really has any, we don't have any strength. The municipality's not going to go around and say, oh, that plant died, you have to replace it with this kind of a thing. I think we should, as Mike said, have some discussion on that we can support or suggest that these are the better types of plants to put in. But I love Betty's point about stuff that the deer don't eat. Doesn't mean that they're native to here, because you walk through the forest and there's an awful lot of stuff that deer don't eat, but we know that they're transplanted by English gardeners or birds or whatever. So I don't know how to handle that completely, but I support, my comment is I support the DP application for this property.
Thanks, Dan.
Yeah.
Sue Ellen?
Second that.
And then Vince.
Sure. I just wanted to second Betty's point about requiring non-invasive plants. And because that is something we have to deal with as a municipality. Sometimes we have to go find them, dig them out, or get people to dig them out and deal with it. But also Oh, I forgot the other thing I was going to say. Never mind. Thank you.
Vince, did you have a comment there?
No, that's it.
You were just ready to second that, yeah, from David,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, I agree. It fits in with the last couple, and it fits in with what we talked about in terms of the I don't know minor conditions that the snug, what would you call it? What was the name of that grouping there again now? Anyway.
Village by the Sea, I think.
Village by the Sea, sorry. What?
Village in the Cove, sorry.
Village in the
Or in
Cove. Guidelines that we discussed earlier. I think it fits in with that.
So just one last thing. I think this concept of invasive plant and non-native plantings, we will talk to Jennifer about that when we discuss the guidelines. So in terms of support, I agree. I think it definitely suits and meets and achieves what we're after relative to the Snug Cove design guideline.
Agreed.
And
so that the advisory design panel support proposed development permit application DP 20120056 on 112 Foxglove Lane.
I think
Mover.
Vince, I saw a second come from Vince. In favor?
Here.
Super.
Thanks,
Thank you all
Emma.
for that one.
Thank you.
And thank you, Emma. I think next we're moving on to discussing what Jennifer's brought forward with the guidelines.
Thought we were doing Snug Cove House. That was the other, was there not another DP application for there? Mike?
You only get 2 today, sorry.
Oh, that's fine. I thought, but in the stuff that was sent to me, I thought we had the other one as well. Nope.
Just 2.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm missing that too. I seem to recall seeing something, but I don't see it on our agenda. So
Emma, are you there still?
not looking up.
Do you have
Yes,
3?
I'm still here. I do not. Daniel does have an active development permit application for Snug Cove House, but I don't believe it's going to the ADP anytime soon.
Okay. It's not in the design. You're right. It's not in the agenda. I just saw, I went through it earlier. It was attached to one of the emails, I'm pretty sure. But maybe not.
Funny year.
There.
Okay, so moving on then to what are we going to call that? Number 5, jumping around. Snug Cove design line update. Jennifer.
Okay, I'm going to start sharing my screen here. I did also email out these files that I'm going to show you now in case anyone would like to follow along on their own computer. You should have it in your email now. My apologies again that you didn't have time to look at this material in advance. And so I hope that we can still have a great discussion and then continue via email. Just as a reminder, I will be going on leave and my last day here was the 27th. So it would be great if I could get your comments back by next Friday. And hopefully that will give me enough time to respond to those comments and provide another draft before I go. And then someone else will need to take that on. So I'm hoping to get any big changes taken care of then. And so it's just minor adjustments after that. Okay, so what I'm going to be showing today is 2 documents. One is the draft version of the guidelines as they stand now, which are much further along than last time, but are basically just the majority of the text, still missing a bit of the background text and the images and diagrams, but I think the rest will be okay. Some of the shifts between now and last time, and I did additional detail in here. I simplified the guidelines so that there was a little less variability in how they could be applied, and then also tried to reduce the requirements that you saw last time to make it easier for people to apply them. I think this is partly informed by the the COVID and economic conditions that are happening right now, but also just trying not to do too onerous of a requirement. So those are the kind of changes that have happened in there, and I'll go through it with you. The other document is I'm showing on the right-hand side of my screen here, which I'm calling the Snug Cove Design Guidelines Analysis. And you'll note that I'm calling them Snug Cove Design Guidelines 2021 now instead of 2020 like before. So the analysis has a general look at a basic cost estimate for each one of the items that we're asking for, just whether it's a big cost, no cost, a little cost, just a very, very rough idea of the cost implications of each one of the items so that we have some idea of what we're asking people to do. And then how it relates to the Snug Cove Design Guidelines previous version, so that you would be able to kind of cross-reference if you'd like, because some of the requirements are slightly different and some are quite the same. You'll note that most of what I'm suggesting today does relate pretty directly to one of the Snug Cove Design Guideline sections already. In cases where there's a thematic correlation, but not really, the requirements are not the same, I've just put it in parentheses here. And in case you're following along in your own document, the key for all down on the second page, so you don't have to memorize what I'm telling you. All right, so then the next part here, I took, what is this, 5 locations that are inside the DP area and applied these guidelines to them to see how many points they would potentially earn, whether they're meeting the mandatory requirements and what their status would be, just so we have some comparisons. So the first column is a residence on, well, 2 residences and a duplex on Mount Gardner, in the like Kates Hill area by the municipality. The post office and its associated building, the pub, the new one, the brewery building that was recently approved, I analyzed, and then also the docks restaurant building.
By brewery, do you mean distillery? Is that the same?
Yes.
Thank you. Says, yeah.
Perhaps distillery is a better word, but that is what I mean, yes. So that we can kind of get an idea of what different kind of buildings, to what extent they would meet these new guidelines or not. Obviously, they're not expected to meet them since they didn't exist then, but I think it's just a nice rule of thumb to get an idea, particularly because the approach of these guidelines, as I presented before, is that there are mandatory items, just a few, and then there's a larger number of point-based items, and the applicants are expected to earn points. So by knowing what points each one of these buildings get, that gives us some idea of what these points mean, and makes it a little bit less mandatory.
Jennifer,
Reason why the
excuse me, Jennifer, where's the residence you're talking about?
It's just down the hill from the Muni, between the Muni and the village.
Oh, the multi-story.
Mhm.
Okay, thanks.
Those
I was
little
looking for a single
buildings.
family. That's fine. Go ahead.
Yeah, there, it's a duplex, the one that I did.
Gotcha.
I think it's a duplex. However, there's a caveat here, which is that I didn't go inside and take measurements and do, you know, a like actual quantitative numerical assessment. This is just based on walking around the outside, taking photographs and assessing what I could do, which is why pretty much all of them have a range of points, because I couldn't tell some of the items, it not being a, you know, a submittal, but it still, I hope, gives you an idea. The other piece of information to help you interpret this is that, so you'll notice that under each one of these objectives, the first item is a mandatory item, which is indicated by this M. And then after that, the following 3 items are point-based with generally 1 point each. So the M mandatory items, when I went through these buildings and assessed them, in some cases it's not applicable. So signage is not applicable to a residence, for example. So that's the NA here. In some cases, yes, they meet it. Sometimes it's a partly situation where they met some of the requirements, but not quite all of them. And then other times it's a yes. Sometimes I couldn't tell, so that's the question mark. And then the X means no, they did not meet this. And so under these current guidelines, not meeting a mandatory item, they would be rejected if they didn't have some alternate compliance that got approved by the panel. Okay, so hopefully I've given you enough information to be able to read and understand the analysis sheet. And if there's no questions on that, I'm going to go through the guidelines themselves. So I'll give you a second.
Sorry, Jennifer, I have one question. Under points, the first A1, C1, D1, E1, H1, N1, P1, they're all mandatory?
Yes.
because they have an M. So for
Yes.
instance, under parking flexibility, sharing is mandatory.
Yes. That's just the title of it. It doesn't mean they have to share. It means you have to read the sharing requirement and they have to meet that.
Gotcha.
That's what we'll.
Good stuff.
Yeah. And then the final one here, which I think was cut off before, is just this rural character aspect. So at this point, before when you saw it, I think there was the same number of these objectives, although I was calling them priorities then. So there are still 8, but before there was a bit more variability in how many items were underneath each one, how many mandatory pieces, and I just thought that it was too complicated. So I went through it and merged any of the mandatory stuff, or sometimes reduced it down, and then just made it so there was just one point for each one of these and 3 under each objective. So that means that with 8 objectives, we have 8 mandatory pieces and then 24 potential points, with the exception of the affordability piece, which gives you 2 points per unit. So you could get quite a few points if you were providing 1 or more affordable units, because I felt that was quite a costly item. The other thing of note there is that this is also costly, and it's something that the municipality seems to want to encourage. I also, at this point, have wording in there that if they earn these points for affordability, they could then potentially be exempt from this mandatory item, which is expensive, the surface variety. So you'll see that when we go in there. So it's just a further incentive to allow affordable housing units to be included in the area. And other than that, the cost for each one of these is not too high. And particularly the mandatory items tend to have either no cost at all with the dash, meaning it's, doesn't have any appreciable cost increase, or just one little $sign, so small cost. Okay, so now I can take you through the guidelines, and I'll leave that analysis page up. So you can still ask questions about that, but I just think it's helpful to kind of go back and forth between the 2 documents. So anything else before I move on? Okay, so
I just have a question,
Yes,
Jennifer.
go
I don't
ahead.
think you could see me. Where do the native plants come in on this? Just so I can orient myself.
It's
'cause
under
I
the
wasn't-
Natural Park Ambiance Landscape Design in 1, right here.
Okay. Thank you. Just making sure I'm
Yep.
on the right page. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so now let's go on the side. So we just start with the table of contents. It starts off with basic information about how these guidelines work, what is their point, how they're applied. Then it gets into the guidelines themselves. The background section is still to be drafted pretty much. We'll be going over the approval process today because I've filled that in much more detail. The enforcement bit still could use a bit on any pre-existing, well, not pre-existing, but things where people do a work that they should not have done. Then there's the checklist, which is similar to what you see on the right here. And that's what the applicants would actually fill out when they submit, and then just some resources at the bottom. Okay, so let's get going. So how to use the guidelines. This is basically the same thing you saw before. I've just updated it to the new layout. The acknowledgement is basically the same as you saw before, updated to match the sign that has since been put up. Okay, the introduction is the exact same, not changed. Okay, application of the guidelines, and this is updated a little bit from when I sent it to you. So here you'll see how many points are required depending on which DP area they're in and whether they're in a residential zone or a non-residential zone. So I'm suggesting that village revitalization DP area would have a 9-point minimum for residential zones and a 12-point minimum for all other zones. And you can kind of see how that matches here. So it makes it similar to this residence that I assessed. And then about the same level as the post office or docks. Well, docks is even above that, but similar to the post office for the minimum within the DP area. And then in the periphery, it's more similar to the pub, and then not quite as stringent as the residence would be, just under that. So it kind of gives you some idea. And in all cases, they're required to either meet the mandatory aspects or to make some kind of an appeal that either it's not applicable or that they've done something else to meet the intent of that mandatory piece. So that's what this paragraph is saying. Then in terms of when the guidelines apply, if you have questions, just raise your hand, because I think otherwise it's going to slow this way down if I stop each time. So in terms of when the guidelines apply, they would be anytime, obviously within the DP area, which we have to reference the OCP for that. And we have a slight change to that we put forward to council way back when. And so that's coming as we move forward with the design guidelines. Then they apply anytime there's stuff happening to the exterior. I'm suggesting some changes here to allow for small projects to be done a little bit easier without too big of a burden. So I'm suggesting here that the panel consider having pre-approved colors that someone could use to paint something that's pre-existing, like a fence or something like that, without needing to go through the whole process. If they choose a pre-approved color or they match the existing color, that they would not need to submit for review. That would just make it easier for people that just want to do a paint job and nothing else. And if they want to do something else, that they would need to submit for review in terms of painting, if they don't want to use the pre-approved or to match the existing. And then I've done the same thing if they're just doing landscaping. So if they just want to plant a couple of plants, they don't have to go through the whole process. They can restore native plantings for habitat creation in a similar design as the existing, or they submit for review. So I'm just trying to give these kind of easy ways for people to do small projects. However, if the proposal is an accessory building, the applicant will still need to apply. And in that case, I'm suggesting that the pre-approval review process, which I will go through when we get to that part, might be best for them to try first. It's meant to be a little bit easier than the approval review process. Okay. Moving down. All right, now we're getting into the actual guidelines themselves.
Sorry, one quick question. The
yes, go ahead.
The pre-approval approach, that then wouldn't come to the design panel. Is that right?
It would. Yeah, maybe I should just skip to that first.
Yeah.
Let me go down.
Okay, I was just curious.
So here's the approval process. Okay. So there's 3 different things that happen in the approval process. One is an optional consultation meeting with staff. That does not involve ADP. Anyone can request this and it's non-binding, it's just for information. And people oftentimes do this, but I just think it's good to make it explicit in here that that's an option for people. Then once they get into the actual review, they have 2 options, the more simple pre-approval review or the more involved approval review. They're basically both of these processes are the same, with the exception that a pre-approval review does not require a long list of drawings like the approval review does. In the pre-approval review, the applicant would supply whatever drawings they think make sense given their project, and it doesn't have to be by an architect or anything. So if it's a very simple, we bought a shed at Home Depot, we just want to put it up, something like that, they can submit what's appropriate for their project. And if it's sufficient, then that's all that they would need to submit. But it still goes through, they submit their completed checklist with the supporting documentation as needed to follow the guidelines. Then staff reviews that application for sufficient completeness to merit the ADP review. Staff can either request additional information or arrange the ADP review meeting. Then the ADP reviews the item. During pre-approval, you have 4 things that you can respond for each one of these pieces on the right, each one of these little guideline rows. Either something is approved and doesn't need a standard review, it's just very cut and dry, very clear. Possibly approved, but you want it to go through standard approval. You're unsure, it needs more information, or it's not approved. So it either requires modification or you're not going to get that point. Then at that point, if they have gotten sufficient points and they have all the mandatory elements, then the project may be recommended to go into the development permit without requiring further approval. So this is only if they've gotten enough under approved, not possibly approved, not unsure, but if all of that has happened and they have the sufficient points, then they can be finished. This would allow them to be able to submit, get a review, and not have to pay an architect if they, if the project is really simple. So it just is a less burdensome option. The other time that this would be useful is if you have a large development project that wants to get an idea of what's going to be required before they go through a full design. So those are the two situations where I really see this being useful. Then the approval review is the same process, except that for approval review, they're required to provide this long list of drawings so that you can for sure assess everything. So in this case, we give them more detail of what's required. And I also write in here that BIM staff or the ADP may request additional documentation for review at their discretion. And at that point, they can go through whatever review process before they can move on to getting their development permit signed. So this is what I'm suggesting. And the main idea here is to provide as much clarity as possible and also provide options depending on the scale of the project.
Gotcha.
Okay. All right. I'm not seeing any questions, so I think I can go up. Okay. All right. So that gives you an idea of the approval process. All right. Back to the things. I'm going to try not to take forever. I'm sorry, you guys. It's 2:15 already. I'm super hot. Okay.
There's a lot for us to digest behind the scenes once we're sitting by the fire.
Yeah, exactly. So you've got your nighttime reading now, right?
Yeah.
So, all right, here, most of the changes that I've made here in these sections is just trying to reduce the requirements and make it kind of staying as core as we can to things that we're really trying to achieve and that are not going to be too burdensome, but that will achieve what you're trying to get in terms of the feeling in the cove. So yeah, to give you an idea, for example, under handcrafted, this is where they have to budget a very small % of the total construction cost towards handcrafted details. And we give some examples. In the previous version, it said 1 to 2%, and you could earn 1 to 2 points. And I've just simplified it to 1%, 1 point. If they do more, that's great. And if the panel wants to, at their discretion, give them more points for a higher %, they can always do that. But this is the baseline. Okay, so we have the mandatory item at the top, which is about signage. It's the same sort of signage stuff you saw before. Providing a visible trim around windows, doors, and roofs is a point that's at least 3 inches in its size. And then wood or wood look materials on exterior walls and roof surfaces. This is a little different because before, I believe we were a bit more adamant about it being actually wood. The issue here is partly with fire and partly with new materials being developed that can basically completely mimic wood. So it just gives a bit more flexibility as materials are developed and proposed and what exactly is wood versus not wood. There's wood composite materials and a lot of different things. So yeah, that one's just a bit more flexible. Okay, I'll scroll to the next one. Not seeing anything, okay. Next is community oriented. First is openness. So this one, the first one is to provide a visual connection on all sides of the building. And I've specified here only non-accessory buildings. So we don't have sheds with windows on all sides and kind of weird things like that. And then that non-residential uses must have windows at eye height at least 25% of the linear area around the ground level where you have those uses. What else? We can't have tall, opaque fences, walls, hedges that exceed 1.2 meters and are more opaque than 70%. So if you have holes cut in them or something like that, then they're okay. So that's that one. Screening, you have to screen back of house features. That's well, you don't have to, it's 1 point. You earn a point for providing furnishings for public amenities like tables or benches, seating, things like that. And then you can also earn a point with various community support services, whatever that may be. This is highly, creative, open. So that's the community oriented one. The intent there is supporting community building and providing community amenities. Next is that we have a human scale to the design. This I heard a lot from basically every designer that I walked through the Cove with, and it seems like it's a really important aspect of the Cove. So this is surface variety is my most expensive mandatory item. And it basically is saying that the buildings cannot have a plain wall facing a road or public space that is larger than 10 square meters that has no visual interest, which could include windows, corners, material changes, anything like that. So it's preventing the proverbial just blank wall facing the street. And that could have some cost implications. So that's the one that has the most expense potential. For roofs, this is just saying that any roof area that's flat needs to serve another purpose, whether it's a green roof or a outdoor area where people can hang out, or producing energy or something like that, if it's going to be flat and large. Okay, entrance doors. This one is about maintaining that rural feel and not either a big box or like a fancy hotel kind of feel. So in this case, the doors need to be just a typical side hinge, not some kind of revolving door or something fancy like that. And just a regular size. And then unless they're residential, not fully opaque, or if they're back of house, then they can be. And then that the entrances would have an overhang that is low above the door. So it keeps that kind of human scale. Then there's a maximum size of uninterrupted glass panes of 2.5 square meters. So they can provide divisions that are, fully through the glass or just surface level divisions. Okay, so that's that one, that's for human scale. So the intent here is that buildings will be arranged and detailed to create small village charm. Okay, next is pedestrian experience. So in this case, the mandatory requirement is that anywhere that's not a single family zone, they must construct a new or repair existing sidewalks along the road to ensure continuous minimum clear width of 5 feet. No asphalt or other solid slab materials are permitted. So it'll be brick, something like that. And they must connect pre-existing pathways and harmonize material choices where possible. Okay, then crossings would need to be maintained or elevated anytime you have the sidewalk and the driveway or curb cut coming through, and the visual dominance would be for the pedestrian way. That's a point. Separation of the pedestrian pathways and the roads is a point, and then providing rain cover for at least 40% of the length of the sidewalk at least a 3-foot depth or 0 point. Okay, heritage. So the heritage part here, if you look on the analysis side, heritage is one of the few pieces that is really quite different from the previous design guidelines. There's quite a few kind of new things that weren't in there before. So that's to note. The first one, which is mandatory, is on preservation. So it says here, if the site hosts any places listed on the local heritage register, it's mandatory to retain some aspect of any remaining elements, at least in some part, if not entirely. So it's meant to be a little bit flexible, but at least they wouldn't just totally bowl over something that's on the register. It also requires that they generate photographic or other records of any such heritage elements and install educational signage acknowledging and explaining heritage aspects of the site. So it's kind of just a bare minimum heritage acknowledgement. The next 3 optional points is to retain an Indigenous advisor on the project that would implement elements of local Indigenous culture, to integrate visible heritage building details. And I give examples of the trim or porch details of the Davies cottages, structural elements of the old general store, the apple orchard, or edible landscapes similar to the heritage landscapes at Davies Orchard. So just some examples to consider. And then the last one is public educational signage about heritage, including textual, visual information, display of historic artifacts, that kind of thing. So those are mostly new. The only one that is previously in there was this details, visible heritage building details. So please take a look at that and see what you think. Okay, natural park ambiance. This is you, Sue Ellen. Okay, so here the intent is that buildings will be nestled among and support local ecosystems. The landscape design piece is a bit different, and I did not end up with the native-like plants, so I hope that this isn't too bothersome, but just consider. I put here, provide layers of primarily native vegetation with examples. So as to provide a diverse and vegetated landscape. If ground level vegetation is not possible, provide vegetation in the form of green walls or roofs, hanging baskets, planters, window boxes, and similar. So it's quite flexible when it comes to invasive to native, just saying primarily native plants, so that we don't have to worry too much about the exact definition, and it kind of gets the idea. Where it is not flexible is invasive species. So it says here, no invasive species are permitted. Any invasive plants currently present shall be removed. So that's where it's much more strong wording. So consider that and see if you think that will work, or if we need to do something else with it. We can go back to native-like if you prefer. Okay, then, so that's the mandatory one. Then the optionals are about retaining existing trees that are over a certain diameter breast height, and then protecting the roots of those trees with uncompacted soil and that kind of thing, so that they will actually survive. And then any new trees also would require enough soil to grow to a decent size. Then rain infiltration is about allowing permeable surfaces and directing uncontaminated rainwater into planted areas rather than into a stormwater drain. And then the wild softscape is about minimizing manicured and mowed lawnscapes. And it suggests here alternatives to grass such as mosses or clovers, or an irregular wild softscape with locally sourced rocks or logs and branches and things that have kind of wild look. So those are all optional by points. Okay, checking for questions. Okay, nothing so far.
Yeah,
I'm still smiling, so I'm okay.
I have one, Jennifer. I think I like the idea of having the native plant thing not completely mandatory. I mean, if you think of particularly distinctive plants currently in the Cove, you look at the Japanese snowbell in Village Square, the magnolia that's in front of the credit union. Those are not native, but they're not invasive, but they're very striking plants. And people who garden for the sake of variety, typically, and the interest in the different varieties of plants, not that they're necessarily native. And I think that's an important thing to add to create variety and really things that will stand out. I mean, we certainly have lots of native plants in the forest, but to have sort of signature species that are different, it can be an important visual enhancement. Anyway, that's just my take.
Thank you.
Any others? Go ahead, Sue Ellen.
Sue Ellen.
Yeah, sure. I'll just say I think I like primarily native vegetation, because I think when we get into the rural landscape part of it and the rural character, I mean, and that kind of thing, it sets us apart from Horseshoe Bay or any of the other kinds of garden places, and from people's private gardens. What we're looking at is a distinctive, unique nature of the Cove. So I'm happy with primarily native, but I'm also, by the way, also looking through the guide in the phone book. There's lots of good materials out now. This particular one has been endorsed by 3 of the Bowen nature groups, and it might be something we could refer people to in the guidelines. I'm not sure, but anyway, I'll have a look more in detail. It's just, we can keep the comments to later.
Thanks, Sue Ellen.
I've taken note of that also.
Jennifer.
Yes. Yes. Who said my name?
I did. And now
I did.
after N, what have we got after N? P, parking flexibility.
Yep, just 2 are left.
Yep.
Are we okay on time?
Oh, who knows?
It's 2:28. You guys okay until 2:45?
Well, let's
Two
keep
sections
rolling and see
until-
if we can move things along. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks,
I
Steph.
think I can finish in 5 minutes or so, and then.
Sure.
Yeah, okay. So now parking, this is now called parking flexibility. This one also has quite a few new things that were not in the previous. So the sharing elements, Mike, that you had asked about earlier, is just about generating a parking plan that identifies any collaboration opportunities with neighbors and considers impacts on street parking availability. Share driveway access and minimize curb cuts wherever possible. Parking requirements may be fulfilled by a covenant to provide spaces on nearby lots. So this is more flexible than the zoning would typically be because it allows for that sharing mechanism. And this is one of the ones that was actually in the previous. They were also encouraging sharing of parking. The other three are about alternatives to private standard sized vehicles. So the first is to provide bicycle parking, and these are all earning points. The second is electrical vehicle charging. And the third is just consideration of other types of small vehicles, whether that be motorcycles or the little golf cart vehicles that are starting to come out now, but just basically providing other types of non-standard parking. And each one of those earns a point. Okay, then the last one is, rural character. So unique and welcoming rural character made for and by everyday local people. So the first one is about unit size. This is the same that was there before, but I think there was some discussion on this last time. So yeah, you might want to think about this one again, but it's basically saying that the average size of a dwelling unit and a non-dwelling unit is a certain maximum. So that means that if you want to provide a large unit, you can also provide a small one. So just like the, for example, that smallest candy store in the Cove, which provides such a great little small business, is really reducing the average unit size in that building without too much difficulty and provides a little slot for a small business. So what I'm trying to do here is encourage that kind of alternative, or else just generally smaller size units. So that's the thinking here, and it helps with affordability and local business, that kind of thing. Okay, the next one is about lighting. This has quite a few pieces in one because I've merged a bunch of old ones on lighting into one lighting piece. So this is saying that any of the publicly visible lighting needs to be warm in its temperature, so on the yellow spectrum, unless it's a neon light or a Christmas light or some kind of a decorative colored light. And then that the light sources should be fully shielded above the horizontal plane, so they're not going up. And then that digital and backlit surfaces that are viewed from public locations would be prohibited. So no like digital signage that's put in the window and stuff like that. So this is an optional point. The other two are about the unit's use. The first is to provide live-work units for local businesses or long-term rental units exclusively for Bowen Island workers and their families. So that would earn you a point if you're renting to local workers or you've got a live-work unit.
Like that.
And then the other one is affordable housing units to rent or own. And that one is the one that breaks the mold in that it's worth 2 points per unit because it can be so costly for a developer. And it also earns a potential exemption to that surface variety point up above that didn't allow for a blank surface over a certain size. And that is the end of that. We already looked at the approval process. Enforcement has not changed. I'm still not sure what to do if a development occurs without a permit. We have to go back. We then have the checklist with some instructions as to how to fill it out. And then the resources. And that is it.
You've done a lot.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer.
Jennifer?
Yeah, I commend you on that. Getting some clarity on this subject.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say it's a pretty impressive analysis. A lot of work went into that. I do think there's a potential issue in when you start parsing in this way and you start ranking things. If it looks like it's going to give you the passage of your ideas, because typically the aesthetic of a building is much more than the sum of its parts. And you can have something that is compliant with the the various rankings and so on, and yet it just is not on. I don't know. I mean, I've seen quite a few examples of that, and that's kind of the mystery of aesthetic. And I'm just wondering if there's any way that something can be added as a caveat about the nature of this. That just because you've necessarily complied doesn't mean that you might pass muster. I mean, you know what I mean? And that's
Well, and
it's the
Jeremy,
innate of what is aesthetically pleasing.
if I could add something there too, I think essentially what you're saying is that if we had a meeting to review a project and we were analyzing it according to each one of these components, that meeting could be quite long. I love the idea of being able to compartmentalize parts of this, but it's almost like it's a guideline checklist, but at the end, there's this wording that says, here's how you best achieve what the design panel is looking for in terms of getting approval. But just because you fill in these boxes and meet a number doesn't mean you will be approved.
Yeah.
Something along those lines.
Yep.
I think there was some material that was actually presented. I recall reading a piece early on when we were considering this, and there was an example in Victoria of a place that was congruent with their design guidelines for historicity or whatever you'd call it, and it was just so patently ugly. I thought, wow, that was that shows up the fact that there are ambiguities even when you do parse these things down. Certainly great guideline and a help for anybody wanting to better understand what is attempted at here. But it seems to me there needs to be some kind of a stipulation about that aspect of the aesthetic. Well, essentially what Mike was saying about not necessarily appearance of approval.
Maybe there's an aesthetic that gets a point or two too. Can I ask a question of the planner?
Yeah, thanks, Sean.
My question is about view corridors. That was something in the original guidelines that showed at least 2 view corridors for people moving through the cove, so that their eye could travel past buildings and see into other parts. Is there anything in here about view corridors?
So that's not included here. There's 2 reasons. One is that this design guidelines is meant to operate at the single site level. So it doesn't include things that would be addressed by zoning or would be addressed in a master plan for a neighborhood or something like that, that would occur at a different scale. So that's one reason. It just seemed like an odd place to put something that's being assessed at a site-by-site basis. The other reason is that there was feedback earlier from the ADP that some of those view sheds were already not operating in the way that they were drawn there, that certain viewpoints just didn't exist. So then it made even less sense to try to adhere to those. But I think that there could be a need for a master plan of the cove with certain height indications there or setbacks or things like that that are not included here.
Thank you. That's fine. I'll respond in my comments, but I just wanted to ask you that question. Thank you.
Yeah, because I do see Sue Ellen's point there. Like I remember reading, it wasn't necessarily about view cones specifically, but it was about porosity of one building to see to a next one, so that you could see through, so that nothing was completely masked over. I understand what Sue is getting at here, and that was in that old guideline. Maybe it comes down into a section of scale or articulation of masses.
It's a tricky one, and I'm sure we've all had experience with intended view corridors that were abandoned because they didn't work.
Yeah, Mike, in all my years, I had view corridors registered on various properties that I looked at and dealt with. And they were almost impossible, as you said, to maintain, legislate, look after. It became very, very difficult.
It's a tricky one, and the last thing you want is a legal matter arising from something like that. If it's in a guideline and it's not being met, and a neighbor is furious, certainly it happens in downtown Vancouver.
Yeah.
Is it a slippery slope to keep that alive? And one would have to analyze what the view corridors are and who they benefit.
It's also a slippery slope to not maintain them.
Good point.
Or at least to plan around them,
Yeah.
so that you have them in the future rather than just abandon them.
Yeah.
So in other words, it's a study that needs to happen relatively soon to see if the existing ones that are in the guidelines still apply, if which ones still apply, and do others apply that weren't considered back when the guidelines were put together.
Well, that can be in our comments. I know we're running short of time and I didn't want to open up a huge big thing, but it's just a question I had. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Well, that's a great question.
Yeah, I think it's really important. And I also think that earlier comment about the analytic versus the holistic, somehow we need to get to the point where you meet the checklist. That means it's okay. It doesn't. Holistically, it has to work as well. And somehow that has to be in the framing of this document.
I agree, Betty. That's very strong.
I think as an example, you could end up with a submission that works in almost all regards, but has one massive fail. So the checklist is glowing green lights, but we look at it and say, yes, but it's entirely painted black. Or, yeah, but the roof is a 20/12 pitch. We could come across that and therefore have to have this, I guess, a veto, for lack of a better word, that adds the human group approach to it.
Can I just say, it wouldn't be you veto, you could certainly say not recommended, but I think it would be, it might not even be council who has a veto, because once people meet development guidelines, I guess this is a question for the planner. Could there be an open-ended guideline?
You can, it just makes problems. And the development permits don't need to go to council.
Right.
So yeah, I wouldn't necessarily have to do that. I mean, my main caution with that approach, and I see, like, I understand what you mean about what if we missed something in the guidelines and then something super ugly comes about. But on the other hand, the flip side of that concern is that if you leave too much to the committee, to their discretion, then it leaves a lot of unknowns to applicants. And so I think if you did want to pursue something where you had kind of a safety valve or something like that, then I would suggest requiring a pre-meeting, after which, if the design doesn't substantially change, that you would not then reject someone even though they've earned all the points. Just because they've put in the money, they've done the design, they deserve some degree of predictability. And you never know if the people on the committee might change from one meeting to the next. And the first meeting it was okay, second meeting you have someone that feels strongly, brings up a new issue, and now your applicant is like, what the heck? I'm getting totally mixed messages from my application. So there's some real pitfalls that can go in the other direction. So there might be a way to address this in process by requiring a smaller set of drawings, maybe just some renderings or some elevations or something, to just make sure that you're not thinking, oh my gosh, what did we miss? But on the other hand, I would suggest to try to kind of come up with guidelines that are as comprehensive as you can, and then know that you can adjust them. If you realize like, oh my gosh, we forgot about roof slope, and apparently this is really important to us, then you can add it and adjust them as you go. Particularly because so far in the approach, you've had a ton of flexibility, and the current guidelines really didn't have anything that was solid. And I'm not sure that there's been that much happiness even among this panel as to what has come out of that maximum flexibility. So those are kind of my cautions in that approach.
I like your idea of the pre-approval, because that gives the applicants the opportunity to start something and not spend a lot of money, and we get to view it and nip it in the butt, so to speak, if it's really going down the wrong path.
But these were the whole concept of this was, as our complaint had been that people weren't looking at the guidelines to begin with. And this is all kind of an attempt to explicate what we mean by certain concepts of the aesthetic. And yet, as Jennifer's suggesting, that idea of having it's almost, I see these guidelines as a part of a pre thing. Ultimately, it has to come before anybody gets too far along. But they do have to have gone to a point of at least conceptualizing a building. It's a guideline, really. It's and I think we would miss it entirely if we just relied exclusively on that parsing to give us an answer, or give a developer an answer, a complete answer, because I just can't see it. Aesthetics just doesn't work that way. And ultimately, this is an aesthetic issue. I mean, you can get people to go and look at buildings that are congruent within the Cove, the old general store, some of the buildings in Village Square, the old cabins, those, and alluding to those examples give you a sense of what the drift. I mean, not that it has to be vernacular, a type of architectural vernacular, but it does have to be, in the sense of a guideline.
Jennifer, I like the word you used, predictability, concept of increasing the predictability for the applicant, that they will get a favorable response from the design panel. I think that's they've got a document that is relatively simple to go through, and B, it raises their predictability for getting what they're after in the end. It feels to me like that's well worded. Rondi.
I would like to go back a little bit to view corridors. I don't know why we have it in there. I mean, because every builder is going to build to his maximum property. Take the brewery, it's 3 sides of the lot on the property lines. How does that, how does it get a view corridor? Or anyone that is going to build in the Cove is going to build to their maximum square footage, or roughly. They're not going to give half of their property to a view corridor, or 1/10 of the property.
Understood. Sue Ellen?
The only 2 view cones, I guess they are, that I remember from the current guidelines, are one from the front door of the library building, the old general store, that sort of points towards your marina, Rondi, and the public walkway and the wooden boardwalk and that kind of thing. And the other one is in Crippen Park. There it is. What people call the old post office, but not many people remember it now. But it allows a sight line down the lane towards Davies Orchard, and so I think that one is more. These are more. The people that need to know about these are staff from Crippen Regional Park and the municipality and the library. So I just do, however, think they're important, like over the next 50 years. And they just won't necessarily relate to everybody, and they're both from the other side of the street. So I'm not—
Interesting, yeah. And are those the only 2?
Yep.
That's all I remember seeing.
Yeah.
But the one that looks into Griffin, the park, it's now is covered by a couple buildings. It's shown there.
The one looking down Davies Road.
Yeah.
Well, you
That
can,
Davies Road, I don't know the name of it.
yeah, the Davies Orchard Road.
Davies Road.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You know, you got a narrow view through there, yes, but where you have it shown now, it's over a building or half another one.
That's why I was referring more to view corridors, but pocket views, whatever you want to call them. I think Jennifer talked about that a little bit when she talked about the permeability of fences, or have some spaces cut into the hedges or something, so you can see through things. But these big, I can put this in my comments. We don't need
Yeah,
to, I can see we're
that's what I
taking
was-
time. Yes.
That's what I was thinking, Sue Ellen. We have a week.
Yeah.
Right, Jennifer? Oh, she's there somewhere.
Yes, sorry, I'm nodding my head.
Oh, okay. I can't see you. You're one
Oh,
of the
let me
few
stop
that
my
isn't
share.
on my screen. There you are.
I'm going to duck out in a moment. When do we need to get our comments to you?
So I've sent it in the email, but it would be by next Friday, please.
So not Friday the 15th, but the 22nd.
Yes, or 22nd. My last day is the 27th, which is that next Thursday. So as long as the comments aren't too huge, I should be able to package them all
Or
together,
14th.
ready for whoever's taking this forward.
Super.
I'd like to be able to do that before I go.
Or 21st, sorry. Okay.
Yeah, 21st.
Thank you.
And then you'll
Thank you,
be
Jennifer.
putting something, sorry, you absorbing the comments, and then will you be sending it to another planner for final review and recommendation, or? we'll just
You
wait till
mean
get back?
once I'm on leave? Is that
Yeah, so once we'll apply or not apply the comments and then present to the panel again.
yeah, then it's up to Daniel how he'd like to proceed. What
Okay.
the priorities are and all those things. Yeah.
Because it'd be nice to get something and documented.
Yeah, I mean, if the comments aren't huge, then it might be ready for some larger approval. I don't know. But we'll see.
Super.
Sooner the better.
Sooner the better, for sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Understood.
And I'm
Thank you,
gonna
Jennifer.
have to go now. So I'll see you guys later. Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Sue Ellen.
Thank you, Chair, for a good meeting.
That was very informative. I think we're almost ready to move to adjourn. Was there anything else in new business at all?
No, that was everything. Good work.
Great.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Any move to adjourn? Anyone?
Move to adjourn.
Betty?
Second.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you.
Thank you, Steph.
Have a
Thank you.
great night.
Have a great afternoon.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.